Yes, I'm just quietly delighted because poetry is now doing what I always believed that it should do, which is speak to people's souls. It's just for a long time poetry has had an unfortunate reputation because of the way it's taught in schools.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people leave school, finish from school, with the idea that poetry is difficult. Um, but when they catch poetry on the wing, when they catch it accidentally, they hear it going past at a literary festival or in any of the public events that's taking place more and more nowadays, they're surprised at how accessible poetry is, how direct it is, and how it moves them. And they're beginning to think that something has changed about poetry. It's just that poetry is now right for our times because of the upheavals, the outrages, the political problems, all manner of things that's getting us upset and angry. We're now beginning to find that poetry, it turns out, is one of the best forms of addressing our times because of its extraordinary brevity, because of its amazing ability to say so much that means a lot to us, very pungently, very powerfully, very briefly. I think poetry's time is here, and politics has helped it. Poetry that's a poetry of message is really quite useless, because you could get the message without the poetry. You could just rant about something. So the message is not really the point of poetry, in spite of what a lot of people like to think. People who want to write poetry without the effort of learning how to write poetry. What makes the poetry of any value is its poetryness, which is the beauty, the truth, the richness, the pungency, the resonance of its language, its extraordinary brevity, it's the way in which it uses sounds to infect our spirit. It is one of the hallmarks of political poetry, it's one of the hallmarks of true poetry, that it's timeless, even when it was created for a very specific time and sometimes a very specific occasion. I'm thinking of Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy, which was written directly in response to the Peterloo massacres. And you read it today, and it speaks to Grenfell, it speaks to Brexit, it speaks to Trump, it speaks to the rise of the right across Europe. It speaks to issues of race. It's extraordinary, and that's what poetry. That's what political poetry must do. Always resonate with the times in which we read it. Otherwise, it's message poetry. It's what I said earlier. It's the poetry that somehow makes it constantly relevant, not the message, oddly enough. And I think it's because the poetry, which deals, as I said, in sounds and deals with the microscopic elements of what moves us in a poem, is also deeply connected to the unseen elements in life that affects us. So I think there's a beautiful resonance between the minutiae of poetry and the minutiae of our lives. Good poetry locks both in a very, very strange way. The other thing is a meditation I keep having about Shelley's famous line about the unacknowledged legislators that poets are. And I think it's because also true political poetry, first of all, deals with an issue that the poet is addressing at any given time, but underneath that, because it's poetry, is also dealing with and resonating the primal laws that govern the depths of humanity. And when they're contravened, poetry speaks. Very good example is that, let's call it the secret law of unity, harmony, or solidarity. When there's disunity, when there is great division, poetry speaks. And it reminds us of what we're doing to ourselves, tearing ourselves apart. I want to go back a few steps and just say something about why I chose to collect these poems. I read 10,000 poems to choose 100. And it's because I wanted to also redefine the idea of political poetry. The common idea of political poetry is that it makes you take to the streets with banners. It makes you go on marches, bang on doors, shout in squares. If it does that, wonderful. But I think what political poetry does is much more subtle and more profound and more lasting, which is that it wakes us up. It thunders questions in us that make us look at our lives differently. We look at our lives, we look at our societies, we look at our environments, we look at our government. Suddenly, we find ourselves looking at the world in a different way. Something in us has been shifted by some suggested idea in a poem. I think that's more powerful. Because you could go on a march and nothing may happen, and you'd be disappointed and disillusioned, and we might not go on another march. But if something in you has been awoken, it kind of stays awoken, and you go on asking questions. You go on finding ways of affecting the body politic or affecting the government as you see it. I think that's more deadly and more fruitful in the long run. So yes, I think poetry can, in crude ways, affect change, but in subtle, more long-lasting, more enduring ways, it can actually make change permanent because it changes our consciousness. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few.